Welcome, everyone, to the 2022 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. I am Adrianna Cuevas, and I am here today with four wonderful authors to talk about A Letter to My Younger Self, Writing Our Lives into the Stories We Tell. Please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival's YouTube channel. And if you are a school, classroom, or librarian or educator joining us, please enter our classroom book set giveaway. You can find the link to the entry form in the chat. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to introduce our wonderful authors today and have them tell you each about their books. So we're going to start off with Alexis Castellanos. Alexis Castellanos was born and raised in Florida, where she enjoyed sunny days, dramatic thunderstorms, and delicious Cuban food. After graduating from college, she moved to New York City and worked as a scenic artist, bringing theatrical sets to life with a little bit of paint and a whole lot of ingenuity. She currently works as a graphic designer by day and spends her nights dreaming up stories. She lives in Los Angeles with her partner and her extremely photogenic cat, Belle. Although, Alexis, I know you have one other cat now that is giving Belle a run for her money. But Isla to Island is her first graphic novel. So, Alexis, will you tell us about Isla to Island?
I will. Isla to Island is a story about Marisol, who goes through Operation Peter Pan. And as she flies from Cuba to the United States, her world drains of color, and she needs to find a way to bring color back into her world. It's my debut graphic novel. And it's heavily inspired by my family's histories and stories. That's it. Oh, and the new cat is named Rory, and you'll be seeing her around. This is her.
Yes, we have to give Rory her due. Our next author is Raquel Donoso. Raquel grew up in Los Angeles, the daughter of Latinx immigrant parents who instilled in her a deep love of reading and learning. For over 2 decades, Raquel led nonprofits and foundations committed to increasing educational opportunities for students. Her debut picture book, Viva's Voice, released in September. Viva's Voice is inspired by her own experience going with her dad to the picket line for the first time. Raquel is the mother of 2 sons and lives with her husband in the San Francisco Bay Area. So Raquel, tell us more about Viva's Voice.
Yeah, well, Viva's Voice is about this little girl with a big voice, Viva, who one day goes with her dad to the picket line and helps him find his own voice and realizes there's a place for little girls who have something to say in this world. So I'm really excited. It comes out September 27th.
All right, excellent. Next up, we have Vanessa L. Torres. Vanessa L. Torres is a Mexican-American author and adventure seeker and mom to a flashlight under the covers reader, which is the best kind of reader. When she's not writing, she balances her time between anything outdoors and her other job as a firefighter and paramedic. She is a Paul Harris Fellow recipient from Rotary International for her work with emergency medical services in Guatemala. She was born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and now lives in Olympia, Washington with her husband and daughter. The Turning Point is her debut novel. So, Vanessa, tell us about The Turning Point.
Yay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm the author of The Turning Point. It came out on 2/22/22. I love that date so much. And it follows Rosa Dominguez, a ballet dancer in 1983, Minneapolis, who is navigating some pretty tough family expectations after they've undergone some significant trauma and change. She also has a new love in her life, Nikki, who looks better in his point shoes than she does. And she has her own aspirations to dance for a very famous singer, the Purple One himself, Prince, who happens to be rehearsing for his movie, Purple Rain, in the studio above hers.
I love that. That's awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Jasminne. We have Jasminne Mendez. Jasminne Mendez is a Dominican-American poet, educator, translator, playwright, and award-winning author of several books for children and adults. Her first book, Island of Dreams, won an International Latino Book Award, and her debut poetry collection, City Without Altar, was a finalist for the Noemi Press Poetry Prize and was released in August 2022. A second YA memoir, Islands Apart, Becoming Dominican American, and her debut middle grade novel in verse, Aniana Del Mar Jumps In, are forthcoming. She lives and works as a college professor in Houston, Texas, with her husband and their daughter. So, Jasminne, tell us about your books.
Hi, yes. Well, Islands Apart, Becoming Dominican American is my second YA memoir. It'll be out next week and September 15th. And it is about my time growing up in the South as a Black Latina and what it meant to go through puberty and family. I'm immigrating to the US and living with a house full of people and sort of confronting also their and my own anti-Blackness within our family and our community. First crushes, first friends, lots of firsts in that book. And so, yeah, it comes out in a couple weeks and I'm really excited.
That's awesome. I love that. So we have a variety of authors here with us today. And I love that because we have a graphic novelist, we have middle grade, we have YA, picture books. But all authors really kind of work off of the same adage, which is write what you know. We do tend to put a lot of our own personal lives in our stories. So not to make everyone suddenly reveal massive things about ourselves, even though we have put them in our books, we are going to talk about that though right now. So I am curious, for each of your stories, what elements from your own life did you draw from to inform your book? Like I always tell students for the Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez, my middle grade, there's a reason why it has a ton of pastelitos de guayaba in it. There's a reason why it has a ridiculous abuelita in it, because that may or may not come from my own life. So starting with Vanessa, tell us, for the turning point, what did you draw from in your own life?
Yeah, lots of things. I was a ballet dancer in Minneapolis as a kid and as a young adult, and I danced for a ballet company called the Minnesota Dance Theater, and I was one of the only inner city kids dancing there in the children's performance division, and one of the only kids there dancing under financial support. And so I grew up in the city, taking the city bus everywhere by myself and taking myself down to the dance studio and back. And my character, Rosa, definitely is on her own a lot. And Prince, the singer Prince, was also rehearsing for the movie Purple Rain in the studio above mine. So that's a very real event that inspired the book. And I would sneak upstairs and watch him rehearse and learn how to pirouette, and just I would be totally starstruck. And sometimes they would let me stay and sometimes they would kick me out. But it was Prince, and if you don't know who he is, look him up and just watch a video or two, because he's pretty amazing and compelling even today. So yes, so much of the book, the Prince inspiration and the ballet, was taken from my own life for sure.
That's so cool. That is quite a story to like, oh, hey, by the way, I practiced in the studio, Little Prince, no biggie. That's awesome. All right, Alexis, for you, I know for you, Isleta Island is such a personal story because it's similar, to Cuba in My Pocket that I wrote. I love putting our two books together because I think they pair so well. But tell us, for you, Isleta Island, what did you draw from?
So my family came here on the Freedom Flights, so a few years after the events of Operation Peter Pan, but so much of their immigration story is in this book, and so much of just my mother's story of like moving to New York City in the middle of winter, having to teach herself English. My grandmother had gifted her like some children's book. My mom couldn't read, and she was like, what am I supposed to do with this book in English? And so that's the book that she used to teach herself English. And those were just the stories my mom always told me growing up. So all of that fed into the book. I mean, the book is just full of Easter eggs, specifically and only for my family. So it is like very, very close to my heart in that way. But like other little things, like Marisol is definitely inspired by my best friend who went around kindergarten asking kids, do you like nature, as a way to find friends? until just some kid said yes. And she was like, okay, you're my friend now. So Marisol would definitely be that kid going around asking, do you like nature? So yeah, it's a little bit of everyone I love, a little bit of my family, a little bit of myself, and just a little bit of imagination too.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Jasmine, what about you for your books? I mean, they're memoirs. So, gee, what did you draw from yourself?
Yeah, no, for sure. For Islands Apart, I mean, it is, mostly it is my life, but ages about like 8 to 13. So right before when you hit puberty and kind of going through, yeah, my imaginary friend. I address a lot of like what you might see as like taboo subjects in sort of adolescence, right? Like, oh, it's kind of shameful to say you had an imaginary friend. Like, no, I did, and I loved her, and she was awesome. Linda was her name. And then, yeah, sort of living and adjusting to when, if you're an immigrant family and you have more family coming and there's like 12 people living in a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom house and what that was like. There's discussion of like your first period, right? And sort of how my mom responded to that. So a lot of firsts and a lot of sometimes often taboo subjects that people sometimes shy away from talking about, and addressing them head on and thinking about the ways in which I, as a young kid, prepubescent girl, kind of addressed it and kind of thought about it, and some reflection as I got older to what some of those meaningful moments in my life were about. So yeah. And then Aniana del Mar jumps in, which is a middle grade novel in verse, looks at a young girl who's diagnosed with a chronic illness, which I was diagnosed as a young adult, well, in my early 20s. And so that draws inspiration from my own journey with learning to come to terms with and manage a chronic illness that could also be debilitating and sort of take you away from the thing that you love. And it's set in Galveston, and I have my in-laws live in Galveston, and I love Galveston, and I love going to the beach there. And so she's very much, Aniana is very much involved with the water and swimming and all of that. So those are all things that I really enjoy.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. And you're brave to handle that 8 to 13 age, because man, that is a mess. That is all of a mess. There's so much content there. Raquel, what about you? What did you draw from for your picture book?
Yeah, well, I mean, my picture book is set in, little girl goes with her dad to the picket line, and that actually is something that happened when I was a little kid. And it's so interesting because I was thinking about like, why did this memory stick with me? All of these years, and yeah, I'm the middle child, so I'm one of 3. And it was we were talking about it as a family, and it was one of the only times where my dad just took me to the picket line. So my dad drove buses in Los Angeles, and when I was growing up, they went on strike several times for long periods of time. So I remember those times in my family because it was really hard for us. But he had to go because they had to go when they were on strike to the picket line. And he only took me, like he didn't take my sister or my brother. And those times where I was by myself, because we were always all together, were things that really stood out. And so that memory was very, very vivid for me. And so it pulls from that. I mean, most of the story is, not exactly the way it happened, but that piece happened. And there's parts in the book where they're going through town, and I would go ride on the bus with my dad. Like when he had to work nights, my mom would pack the 3 of us up, and we'd go on the bus, and we'd stop and get chocolate and tacos at the place, that my dad would go to. And so those are just kind of memories that have stuck with me. But it's also, I mean, I work in social justice, and I work for, nonprofit organizations. And so I've done work around workers' rights and student rights my whole career. And so part of this is also, and that's the, the other piece of the book is, kind of speaking out and speaking up. And I just thought it was really, especially now, such an important thing to talk about with young people. And so it kind of blends, 2 different pieces of my life, my career and work, and my personal life.
Mm-hmm. I think it's always fascinating what memories we latch onto, because I've realized as a parent, the things that I thought were going to be a big deal to my child, the things that he remembers and makes a big deal about are like these just minute, nothing things. So yeah, I think it's fascinating what ends up sticking in our minds. But one thing I want to talk about is the responsibilities that we have as Latinx authors, yes, we are telling deeply personal stories, specific stories to our experiences. But unlike a lot of non-POC authors who kind of just get to tell their stories and there they are, we have a greater responsibility representing our communities. And it's sometimes difficult to balance that. So for example, when I was writing Cuba in My Pocket, that's the story of my dad's immigration to the United States from Cuba. Obviously a story specific to his experiences. But as I was writing it, I felt this responsibility to make sure that I was being compassionate of the greater immigration wave that happened at that time, that Alexis's family was part of. And so there's that balance that you have to do. And it's difficult sometimes because, all Dominican Americans aren't the same. All Cuban Americans aren't the same. We each have specific experiences. So I'm curious for all of you, when you were telling your stories and choosing what things to include, what was it like for you to realize that, yes, you were telling your story, but you were also adding to that greater, literature of your culture, and what was that experience like? So big question. So Jasmine, I'm going to start with you.
No worries. I was ready to answer right away anyway.
Yay.
Yeah. I mean, I think with me with memoir, it was a little bit, I wouldn't say easier, but it was different in the sense that I was able to say straightforwardly, basically, in one of the essays, like, no, I'm not we're not a monolith, and I'm not a Dominican American that was born and raised in New York, which is where we typically think of that Dominicans are from. And we all sort of have this Washington Heights lived experience. And that was not my experience growing up at all. And I say that sort of very blatantly and very straightforwardly in the text, and saying, like, this is my unique experience as a Black Dominicana being raised predominantly in the South as a military brat, which is a different sort of lived experience. But it was also still important to me to embed those parts of my life and my culture that were prominent, right? There was a lot of merengue and bachata dancing, and there were a lot of family parties celebrating every little thing with lots of plátanos and arroz con pollo, and like imbuing, my story with those details that were specific to me and my experience growing up. But that also may relate right to the broader sort of Dominican community. But I've always been very straightforward with the fact that, like, my characters who are Dominican and Dominican American are from the South, and our experiences are sort of coached in that Southernness as well, and in that sort of tension of, like, well, what does it mean to be Black and Latinx in this space, in this place in the world, in the United States, that kind of doesn't understand or know what to do with us, right? How can you be both? And I tackle some of those issues and questions, right, in the text as well. And yeah, I always make it very clear, like, we are not a monolith. And my experience is a very unique and different one, but that hopefully addresses also, yeah, the larger questions of what's important to our community, to our Latinx community, right? Is it the family, the culture, the food, the music, the language was really important. I talk a lot about my parents instilling and wanting us keep both, keep the Spanish alive for us. And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love that, because you are absolutely right. Sometimes when you check more than one box, people all of a sudden don't know what to do with you. So absolutely. Raquel, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with that. I mean, I feel like there's, I can kind of write from my experience, my perspective, and in our community, there's such a breadth of experiences and depth of experiences, and and different ways that people have been in this country or came into this country, and living in communities all over. And so I feel like, I want to see more of those stories told. And so there was when I kind of started this journey, I felt sometimes like our stories get pigeonholed into particular ways of thinking about us. And I was like, well, that's not my experience. My friends have, we all have some similarities and we all have differences. And so I think I just felt like I really wanted to share that and express that. So I guess I don't worry too much um about kind of the burden of it or the responsibility of it, because I feel like as long as I'm kind of true to myself and what I'm trying to put out there, you know, that's really what counts, and not kind of appropriating anybody else's, you know, experience or understanding, but doing it from my point of view. So, so I think in that way, it's, you know, it's exciting and can be kind of freeing to write.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think you nailed it. I think the more opportunities we're given to tell our stories and the more people that get to tell their stories, the burden becomes less and less. So you're absolutely right. Alexis, what about you?
I was really nervous writing East Little Island kind of because of this. I grew up in Miami, Cuban American. So I grew up like the majority of Miami. Everything was catered, especially in the 90s, everything was catered to being Cuban. I didn't really have a concept of not seeing myself represented. It was like always there and always in a variety of voices. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized how different the Cuban American experience was compared to other Latinx communities. And my novel's also basically wordless. So I was also worried about how much information I wasn't directly feeding to the reader. So I do have an author's note at the end where I try to lay out some of the points in history and what's happening, and like, you know, mentioning that, you know, around the same time the Operation Peter Pan happens, where, you know, over 14,000 unaccompanied minors are brought into the US with the help of the American government, and they had very strict rules about not being adopted out and that families would be reunited, that the same government that approved that had also just done a mass deportation of Mexican Americans back to Mexico. So like through history, Cubans have had this like preferential treatment with the American government because of the politics. So that's definitely something I wanted to mention in the book because I'm aware of how Cuban Americans have been treated in history. But then also within the Cuban American community, I was also very aware of like how I represent Cuba and Fidel's Cuba and revolution is also a touchy subject. And had a lot of feelings as I was working on this book and, you know, researching and stuff. So it, I don't know, I was very anxious about it the whole time. But ultimately, like I landed somewhere where like, I think I'm proud of the message that I have in the book and how I represented things in the book. It was hard because there are no words and everything's just pictures telling you what's going on. And in doing that, I also hope that the reader would become interested enough to maybe read some other books and begin to be able to form their own opinion on what's happening and kind of develop a curiosity in the reader so that they want to learn more about this.
Mm-hmm. That's what I love, though, that about your graphic novel, that it is practically wordless, because that it just goes to show you that the words that you did choose to include like have that much more weight and are that much more meaningful. So I adored that. Vanessa, what about you?
Yeah, I love this question. It's such a powerful question. I just love hearing about everyone else's experiences. It's just very telling that we all try really hard to come from an authentic place when we are writing our stories. And I think that's the most important thing. And for me, I mean, it just, again, I love hearing all these stories because it really does show that there's such a huge spectrum to being Latinx. I mean, I grew up Mexican American in Minneapolis in the 80s when there weren't very many other Mexican Americans around. I mean, I didn't know anyone else who was Mexican American except for my own family, which was huge. I mean, my grandmother had, I think, 16 pregnancies and 13 kids. My dad's from a very large family, and we hung out all the time. I mean, we were always around each other, but they were the only other Mexican Americans that I knew. I also came from a family who didn't allow Spanish to be spoken outside of the home. So my dad grew up with that, and then passed that on to me and my sisters. And now, like today, we were just talking a few weeks ago, he said it's one of his biggest regrets, and that makes me very sad because we still are Mexican American, even though I am not fluent in Spanish. I can speak Spanish, but I'm definitely not fluent, and neither is my dad. And so I really carried that forward to my book. I really wanted to represent that there are so many of us out there who identify as Latinx, but we don't necessarily speak Spanish fluently, and it doesn't make us any less Mexican or less whatever, however you rep. And it's taken me a lifetime to get comfortable with saying that and coming to that point. So yes. So as long as I come to the table with my stories from an authentic place, I feel good about it. So yeah, that's how I'm going to answer that.
I love that. No, I adore that because you are absolutely right. A bit of a lighter question now. As we are telling our stories, there are things like for me personally that I get really excited that I get to talk about these things from my culture with kids. And for me, it's food. I don't know if it's just because I'm hungry all the time or what, but like I have a middle grade that's coming out in April, The Ghost of Rancho Espanto, and the main character, Rafa, basically half his dialogue with this other secondary character is just them debating what snacks are best because she's Korean American and she thinks she has the best snacks. He's Cuban. He thinks he has the best snacks. And I got really excited, like, oh, what snacks am I going to pick to talk about? I'm going to talk about merenguitos and all these little things. So I'm curious, as you were writing, was there a moment where you got excited of, I get to talk about this. I love this. I adore this. I get to put this in my story. What really got you excited to share this aspect of your culture with young readers? So Alexis, I'm going to start with you.
It was mostly me being excited to share things very specifically about my family. Because as I mentioned, this is heavily inspired by my family. The only thing my family was able to bring from Cuba to the United States were photo albums. So there's the only things they had from Cuba, that and maybe like a couple of trinkets. So like all the photo album inspiration behind the book is definitely pulled from photos that my family had taken. There were other little things, like my grandfather had this Jose Marti bust in his house. And I made sure to throw in the Jose Marti bust. So yeah, those were the things I was most excited to put in, but that was for my family specifically. No one else is gonna know that my grandfather had a Jose Marti bust. But I don't know. Since it doesn't have any words, and it's just pictures, it's like a little bit difficult for me to answer because I was excited to share a lot of things, but I don't really know if you know that I'm sharing it with you. I mean, there is a scene where they cook food. They do make arroz con pollo, which was like my grandmother's. Oh, that's something. Arroz con pollo, they make it. And I have basically my grandmother's recipe at the end of the book. That was something I was very excited to put in. It's very cute. See if I can pull it up. Yeah, this is the arroz con pollo page and how my grandmother would serve it with the petit pois and the roasted red pepper things. So yeah, that's the thing. Food. Also, it's food.
I love it. I love that.
And there's a Benny Moré record. So yeah, those are the things.
And I love the pictures you've shared online where you'll put, the actual family photo and then you're drawing from the book. That's cool to see. And I don't know that you can get more peak Cuban than a Jose Marti bust. I mean, that's it. That's the standard. So Vanessa, what about you?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about food too. But, my book takes place in Minnesota. So Minnesotan culture is a culture all of its own for sure. And so tater tot hot dish had a huge play in my book. I mean, we ate a lot of tater tot hot dish growing up. If you're from Minnesota, you definitely know what it is. So kids, go look it up and have your parents make it for you or whatever, because it's so yummy. It's just like a bunch of tater tots and ground beef and yummy stuff all put into one pot with cheese, and oh, it's so good. And you can make it like a casserole or in a big pot, but my character definitely ate a lot of that in the book, and I was really excited to put that in there, and people who have read it from Minnesota definitely comment on it all the time. But also I really wanted to, I don't know, give a shout out to my grandmother, who was my family's super Catholic. I grew up, I call it super Catholic because we just were. And my grandma had like the abalone shell on the TV with the Virgin Mary in it that lit up and all of that. And so in my book, my character's abuela has died recently, but she talks about her a lot, and she keeps her rosary by her bed and wrings her hands just like her grandmother did, and all those things. She has the velvet bullfighting paintings and everything that are in the hallway, and just like my grandmother did. And so again, they're little Easter eggs that my family would recognize, but I hope that it added like some depth to my book as well, some visual to like what sort of world my character lives in. And my character's not super Catholic at all, but it brings her comfort when she does go to church, even though she doesn't necessarily believe. And that was me too. So yeah, so I was excited to put that in the book.
I do have a very important question for you though about tater tot hot dish,
Yeah.
because I don't know what was wrong with my like TikTok algorithm or what, but I saw a debate online about, do you line up the tater tots in the dish, or are you just dumping them on chaotically? And what do you do, Vanessa? Because I'm sure there's a right way.
Yeah, I like clean lines, so I do line it up, but I have been to friends' houses where they just dump it all in there. But then it becomes all squishy and you can't really tell that the tater tots are in there. So yeah.
Raquel, what about you?
Well, I mean, I said before there was, my mom, when my dad had to work at night, would get us all together and we'd go meet him and ride around in the bus. And so that was something that that I was really excited to put in there. They were really, I mean, I just remember those nights very vividly and loved it. But I'm working on a couple of other, and the other thing that I put in there that I actually was very purposeful and excited about was in the book, I go with, Viva goes with the dad to the picket line because her mom had to go to work. Right. And I really did want to show that. I grew up, where my mom worked the entire time I was, that I was from when I was born. And not all the moms that, I knew did. And so I really wanted to make sure that that was in there. And so I was excited about that. But I'm working, it's on submission, a book right now, called Fina's Tree, and it's a Christmas book. And that one really, really is based on my mom coming to this country and taking her classroom Christmas tree because they couldn't afford a tree home. And so there's so much about that book that I'm, extremely excited about. Just even that story. I mean, it just speaks to her, kind of strength and her tenacity she was in second grade and like lugged this tree home. And so that, so I'm extremely excited about that because I get to kind of tell that story of, these about kind of kids and how much strength and eagerness there is. And so, so I think there's just so much that's exciting to put into the books.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Jasmine, what about you?
Overall, I mean, there's probably 4 big things that whenever I can put them in, I have had time to think about this question. I will put them in. Dominican food, so arroz con pollo, plátanos, maduros, sancocho, habichuelas, which goes to my next big thing is whenever I can imbue, whether fictional or my nonfiction work, with like Dominican words like habichuelas and guagua and que lo que and guachiman, like anytime I can put like Dominican Spanish into my work, it gets me really excited. Because living for 25 years in Texas, it's a lot of not Dominican Spanish. And so I've had to like learn how to code switch. And so I'm like, no, you will not steal my Dominican Spanish away from me. So I always try to put that in my book. Dominican music, so merengue, in particular, Juan Luis Guerra. If I can sneak in a Juan Luis Guerra reference in there, I'm all about it. And then lastly, Dominican history. So in my fiction books, I always try to name my characters related to Dominican history, famous Dominican women, revolutionary Dominican women. So Aniana is named after a Dominican revolutionary who was anti-Trujillo. Her best friend, Maria Teresa, is named after one of the Mirabal sisters, Maria Teresa Mirabal. And so there's, Josefina and Josefina's Habichuelas, my picture book, is named after a Dominican-American poet. So all of the characters in my fictional work, I try to name after famous Dominican women and historians and people and activists, because then hopefully it will spark the reader to like look the person up and to learn some Dominican history, which is something that I never got as a kid. And all Dominican history that I've learned, I've had to learn on my own as an adult. So that's what really excites me.
Excellent. All right. So we have some incredible student questions that we are going to jump to because in my opinion, I mean, I asked you questions, but students ask the best questions. So we're going to dive into those. And I think our first one is going to play.
When you were younger, did you like reading the books you were forced to read in school or only the books that you would read in your free time?
I adore this question. I feel like my son would agree with this being asked. So let's just jump to Raquel. What do you think?
Oh gosh. I loved reading all books, even books that were not that great sometimes. I had to finish them and love them. So obviously I, was always kind of went for the books that I was interested in and wanted to read those first. But I actually did get a lot of books assigned to me. I went to a school where over the summer they would give us a list of the books that we had to read, and we had we would have to do book reports on them over the summer, and then come back and share those. And so I had a lot of required reading. I also not all of it was stuff that I gravitated toward or liked, but for the most part, I really did enjoy reading the books that were assigned to us as well. But yeah, I was a big nerd. So
the teachers in the audience are cheering like, see, listen. All right, Vanessa, though, what about you? And it's okay to tell the truth.
I'm going to, because I just had this discussion with my 11-year-old because she was assigned a required reading book over the summer, and she is such a voracious reader, like, a book a day sometimes. She just really always has her nose in a book, and she could not get through that book. And I was like, "Oh, honey, what's the deal?" And she's like, "I just don't like being told what I'm gonna read." And so part of it is just that. It's not that she didn't necessarily like the book. It's like she likes to have the choice. So like I was like, well, maybe give yourself a break. Like choose a book that you really want to read and sprinkle that in between the one that you're being required to read. And so when I was younger, I kind of felt the same way. I started to think about, think back in time, like how I felt. And I remember not really being too excited about the books that they chose for us to read. And part of that was I was a reluctant reader for a very long time. Like I wasn't that book nerd that hung out in the library or under the covers with my flashlight. And part of it was that I just didn't see myself in books in any way, shape, or form. And it wasn't until I read the Beverly Cleary series, Ramona, because this was a family that was struggling with money. Dad lost his job. Mom had to go back to work, sibling sisters. It was all me. I mean, that was my family completely. And so then I really started to search for those books out there that I could connect with. So like maybe a good idea is to just like, read a little bit of a book that you really want to read if you're reluctant to read the one that you're assigned. That's just my advice.
No, that's great. Because I may or may not have written a scathing review when I was in middle school of a book I was assigned to read because the teacher was my mother and I wanted her to know how much I hated the book. So anyways, let's go to our next student question that we have.
Can kids be authors, or is it just adults?
All right, Jasmine, let's let her in on the secret.
I love this question. Absolutely. Yes, kids can be authors, and I highly encourage it. If I really think about it, I've been an author since I, was in 3rd grade, and we had these little white books that were just like a white hardcover, and then on the inside there were blank pages, and we wrote our stories and drew the pictures on the other side, and then we showcased them, and that's a form of publishing. If you share your work, that is a form of publishing. So all it takes is the desire to have to write a story, to have a story idea, to put those words and ideas on paper or record them. There's so many ways that you can tell a story these days, and share it with others, your family, your friends. There's also ways as a student to get published. There's different magazines for kids and things like that are asking and requesting young children to send their work in so they can see it in print in a magazine. So ask your teachers and ask your librarians what those opportunities are. Because as long as you have a story in your heart to share and you find a way to get it out there, then I consider you an author. So
absolutely nailed it. So we'll go to our 3rd question. All right, so this is from Tyler. Are your stories mainly inspired by personal experience or imagination? How do you balance the two? We've been talking so much about our, personal experiences that we've put in our story. So I'm just going to open this up to whoever wants to answer. But, what is it? How do we balance both, telling our stories, but also putting in a little bit of imagination in there as well?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. I mean, when I had the idea for Viva's voice, um, it really was just I went with my dad to the picket line. Like that's the part that was my personal experience and the memory that I had. Um, and to be honest, I don't even remember. I mean, I remember some pieces of it, but I was really young. And so I don't remember all of it. The second half of the story, which is the dad having to go on stage at the rally and speak and being nervous about it because he's very quiet. And that part where Viva helps him to do that was totally my imagination. It was totally like, what do I want to tell in this story? And it's stuff that just, I know it's, it just kind of, that imagination part just kind of came as I was writing and thinking about it. And so that was purely imagination. That did not really happen. So so it was fun putting those two pieces together.
Mm-hmm. Alexis, what about for you? Since Isla de Island, is a family story, but when we are getting those stories from our family, some things they remember and some things they don't. So did you have to fill in any blanks?
Well, I would say this is a great mix of personal experience and imagination, because by no means is this my family's story. I just took the bits, like the fact that they came from a tropical island to Queens in the middle of winter. That was like a piece that really stuck out to me, and I was able to take like that seed and grow from it things from my imagination. So when I'm writing, sometimes it is like a personal experience. It is that like initial seed for an idea, and I fill it out with either other little seeds, like, oh, this happened to someone else I knew and I thought it was funny, or this one character reminds me of that one person I met that one time, and fill it out with like little things. And then also imagination. And then another big inspiration for me when writing is history. Different people in history, different events in history can be so interesting to research and explore and pull inspiration from. So like, especially when I'm writing something that isn't like, if I'm writing fantasy or something, history is a big inspiration for me. Because I've never written a dragon. Well, I guess they haven't either in history. So that's like a little myth, a little bit history. Yeah, a little bit of everything. I like to take like a seed from something somewhere and fill it out with different parts, like a little web of story.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Because it is sometimes hard to balance that. Because I know that when I was writing Cube in My Pocket, I asked my dad, you were sent to the United States by yourself. You didn't know what was going to happen to your family. You didn't know if you ever were going to see them again. You didn't know anyone. How did that feel? And the man literally looked at me and went, it was okay. I'm like, no. See, I am trying to tell a story here with emotion and tension. And so, yes, a lot of times authors, we do have to add things and we have to use our imagination to fill in our story.
And I don't want to base it entirely on a person, because that's not totally right. But my mom didn't understand that. I was like, you're not Marisol. And I would give her the book, and her notes would be like, I remember when they served me milk in the cafeteria and I thought it was gross. And she would like read the book and she'd be like, I wore saddle shoes. And I was like, well, it's not you. But I did switch some of her shoes to be saddle shoes, because my mom she was like, it's me. And I was like, well, it's not. But she would read it and she would cry because it was like her experiences. So I was like, I guess you can say that, because I did like mine your personal experience for the story.
I love that. You were erasing
like,
the shoes
you've
drawn to make saddle shoes. That's amazing. All right. Well, that actually brings us to the end of our panel. I want to thank our wonderful, wonderful authors, Jasminne, Alexis, Vanessa, Raquel. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, for sharing your stories. And for those watching the panel, I hope that you find lots of amazing books to read. And I hope that you perhaps get to tell some of your own stories as well. So thank you for attending the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. And be sure to watch so many of our other amazing panels. Thank you so much.